we talked about Zechariah and Elizabeth. And Zechariah, both of them were old and they were barren and they had shame on their lives because they didn't have any kids, right? So that's just the way the world worked back then. Like and kind of works that way today. If you don't have kids, you're like, type of thing. So they had shame because they didn't have kids, and let's see. And then Zechariah was in the temple, and he saw the angel came and he said, "Hey, you're going to have a child, right? You're going to have a child, and his name's going to be John." And Zechariah goes, "So how can I be sure of this?" Like he starts negotiating with this angel, and he goes, "How can I be sure of this? I am an old man, and my wife is also well along in years." He's like, "How can this be? How can this be?" And he questioned it, and what happened to him? Mute, right? Mute. Completely mute, and he can't talk. Well, we fast forward 9 months later, right? And they have the baby, and 8 days after the baby is born, he goes to be dedicated. He goes to be circumcised. And that's also the day he gets his name. Right, now notice 8 days later. Have you ever noticed how baptismal fonts always have 8 sides? Coincidence? No. Anyway, so I won't go into why it's an 8, but what do you think? We can talk about that later if you want. Why does that have 8 sides? And right now, all of you are racking your brain of all the churches you've been to, and you're like, do they all have 8 sides? That's what some of you are doing, and some of you and you're like, they all have 8 sides, except for that one weird church that you went to, and when you were 37, and that's anyway. So they name the child, and all of the family, they're like, you're going to name him Zechariah, right? I mean, after all, he said he saw like an angel, and now he can't speak. Wow, you should really name him after your husband now, right? You need to say that. And Elizabeth is like, no, he's going to be called John. He's going to be called John. And the relatives are like, what? Yeah, no one among your relatives has that name. You can't do that. You're not supposed to do that. You can't name someone just willy-nilly whatever you want. This isn't the United States of America in the 21st century, right? This is, they said this is 0, actually maybe 3D AD Palestine, right? That's what they said? No, maybe not. Anyway, they weren't, with that name John, they weren't meeting the expectations of the family. They weren't meeting the expectations of the family. So here's the phrase of the day again. Oftentimes we lead with expectations. We lead with expectations, but God leads with grace. God leads with grace. So we see that they're leading with these expectations, and there's all kinds of expectations that are thrown on us all. I'm sure you have plenty of stories about times when you didn't meet the expectations and it all got a little weird. This happened to us. So, as a pastor, we get invited into various people's homes, and we were, this is probably 4 years ago, something like that. And Coley and I were invited over to a Christmas Day party with a family in the church. And a great family, super supportive people, great people. And we're over there, and they had a bunch of people out of their family at the house, and we're having a good time. And they have a white elephant gift exchange. You guys know what these white elephant gift exchange things? My family also called them grad bag and stuff like that. And I'm going to be bragging a lot this sermon probably, but I don't mean to brag too heavily, but in a weird sense, I'm good at white elephant gifts. Now, I don't mean to pick on Coley at all. She doesn't really like all my gifts. All that, she would not probably say that I have a weird ability with it. All I will say is that one white elephant gift exchange we did last year, the person still talks about this amazing gift that I brought, all right? Now, I'm not going to reveal my secret powers yet, but perhaps some of you will see them later on. But I like cheap, kind of funny gifts, right? So we go over to this family, and they said they have a white elephant gift thing, and we just got, with every white elephant gift exchange, the expectation we had in our hearts was that it was like a $10 gift or $15, because that's what I grew up in my cheap family. Like the most coveted gift in my white elephant gift exchanges was always like the double pack of WD-40 or something like that, or a box of Twinkies. Like people would go crazy over that, right? Like it was weird. And so we're doing this gift exchange with this family, and one of them goes around and they open up the present, and we're like, oh, that's above the $15 limit. like that's actually something kind of nice. And then the next present opens again above the $50 limit. That's actually something kind of nice. And I think I opened up the one that I ended up with, which was like a Blu-ray movie and 2 tickets to the movie theaters with but yeah, it's expensive stuff. Like it's a practical gift, but there were like nice things. And Coley and I leaned to each other and we're like, oh man, we brought cheap garbage like to this, right? And it got a little awkward. It's a good thing it's anonymous. I think they probably figured it out. It's like, oh gosh. Like pastor's really struggling with money, like just it's bringing weird stuff. But we didn't. The expectations, we didn't really meet them. It's okay. The guy who got my gift, like it was this cheap little game thing. Like he didn't like me anyway. So like it worked out. It didn't work out. Anyway, it's fine. It's fine. Anyway, like we didn't meet that expectation, and it made the situation a little awkward. And that happens a lot, where we feel that pressure on ourselves and we put the pressure on other people that we're not meeting those expectations, or they're not meeting our expectations. And it just causes stress and anxiety. I mean, look how pushy this family was being. There's no one in your family that is named John. Why are you doing this? Like, why would you begin to do that? And this goes on. There's all kinds of expectations around this time of year. So when I was talking about Christmas Eve dinner, how many of you already know what you're going to eat on Christmas Eve? You have that expectation, right? Yeah, like there's that expectation. Like if you go to church on Sunday, do you know which church you're going to be at? Yeah, right? Well, not Sunday, but like on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. You know what your schedule is. We have all these expectations, right? And sometimes people come into our lives or things happen in our lives which kind of blow up those expectations. And they change them. And our expectations can be really hard on other people too. And they can be hard on us, because we can feel like we're not measuring up. We can feel like the relationship is eroding because we can't measure up to the relationships that we're in, even though those expectations may not be there. There's a lot of pressure for us in this time. So Elizabeth, she says, no. And she motions to her mute husband, and he asks for a writing tablet. To everyone's astonishment, he wrote, his name is John. Now, I kind of hinted at it earlier in the reading, but do you guys know what John means? You know, if you were putting on your biblical glasses and you were reading the text like a Hebrew, do what? The Lord is gracious. Yeah, good job. The Lord is gracious. Look at that. Like, think about that. This family who was shamed, it says in Scripture that they had shame on them because they couldn't have a child. And they're advanced in years, and suddenly God strikes them with not an illness, but we'll say an illness, not being able to talk. And they look down and they name their kid John. God gives him this name, John, and it says, the Lord is gracious. And this is what I love about this story too. This is the kind of the first naming of the new way in Luke. This is setting us up for Jesus being born, for the story about the redemption of the world, the story about how God is coming into the world. And we can see from the family that they're just like us. They're leading, we often lead with these expectations, right? But we see that God is leading this story with grace. We see that God is leading it with this graciousness. The Lord is graciousness. And I love how they are literally looking down at this baby and they're saying, the Lord is gracious. You know, everything that they couldn't have or did have. And the beautiful part of that is the Christian story. That is the story of the church, is that the Lord is gracious, and that's how we lead. That's how we go out into the world proclaiming that the Lord is gracious. But, what would happen if we went outside, if we all got up, we went outside and we walked around, and maybe we went and talked to our non-Christian friends? You guys do have non-Christian friends, right? Ooh, expectation. Like that's but we go talk to our non-Christian friends, or we just talk to random people who don't give a rip about church, don't care about the Christian faith, and we ask them, what do you have to do to be a Christian? How do you think they would ask? How do you think they would answer? Maybe you have to live a morally pure life. You have to do good things. You know, don't cheat on your spouse type of things. You know, go to church, raise a perfect family that's like weirdly submissive, right? Like, I'm glad someone laughed at that. Like that's vote Republican, maybe some of them would say. Right? Don't sin. You know, do this or that. You know, whatever's in your head. Like, why? Why would they answer that way? Is it because that we have led with our expectations? Is it because that we've led with our expectations? And we've also put those expectations on us too. Because I think that idea of grace, the idea that God unmerited favor towards our way, even though we tend to be sinners and we tend to ruin relationships sometimes, and we also bring beauty into the world too, but that we view that, oh man, I have to meet these expectations too. I have to meet all these things. And sometimes I think we miss that name, John. We miss the first chapter when an older couple who can't have a baby is looking at this baby to them, this baby that has taken away their shame, and they name it something that they could never have said was in their family before. And they name it, the Lord is gracious. The Lord is gracious. Because God works in a completely opposite way. On Wednesday, coming up on this Wednesday, we're talking about, last week we talked about faith, this one's going to be about hope. And the hope we see is found in all these weird places that are just backwards, and we see that God is gracious, and it's backwards to how we think. Like God gives us this unmerited favor, and it's completely backwards, and it just destroys all of our expectations. I mean, look, we're saved from death by God hanging on a cross. We look for salvation in an empty tomb. It's all based around this unmerited favor and grace. And I could keep on just talking about it, but I need to tell a story about a friend of mine. And this friend's name is Mike. Now, you have to understand, I have a couple of rules when I'm preaching. I try not to make people into projects, okay? And I try not, in my preaching, I try not to have individual stories about anybody specifically. Normally, I try to keep it broad. And I try not to make myself the hero in the story, all right? Because I like self-deprecating humor more, and where I'm not the hero. Well, I'm kind of breaking all my rules with this story, and I kind of didn't want to tell the story, but the story's too good. And I probably shouldn't be telling you about all that, but here we go. About Mike. Mike, at the last church I was at, he was our handyman. And he was, I called him one day, and he started coming, and Mike was really easy to talk to, and he and I formed a pretty decent relationship. I started, probably 3.5 years ago, started calling on Mike to fix things around the church, and he and I would have these really great conversations just about life and family and everything around there. Normally he would be behind some toilet while I'm sitting over there in the stall, or he'd be in the back of a closet somewhere, working on something, and we would be just talking about life. And as I hired him more and more, our conversations got deeper and deeper and deeper, and we started talking about life. And we would talk, our conversations we would talk about, how long he had been sober. And then when the time came, we talked about how he drank too much that weekend before. And there was always a singular thread, a singular theme with Mike. He was always really hard on himself. He was always really hard on himself, and he would always say, "Hey, he never said this explicitly, but you could always tell in his language that he was trying to make up for his past sins. He was trying to make up and overcome his past sinfulness, because the alcohol in his life destroyed his family. He now was divorced, and his kids, he was only able to see his kids a couple times a week. And he still had a decent relationship with his ex-wife, but he wasn't able to be with his kids all the time. And he was always just work, where he's like, if I could just work hard enough and get enough, then I can finally get some peace on this. And as I look back over the 3 years, I always wondered why Mike talked to me like he did. And I think it was because I always led with grace. Always led with grace. And he would start talking, he'd go down the path of I need to overcome all these things. And I would say, Mike, that's why Jesus died, man. That's why God came to this world. He brought beauty and grace into this world, and then he took all the sin and darkness and your guilt, all your past transgressions, all those things, he took them to the cross. And he died so you don't have to suffer with that past guilt anymore. Yeah, you may have to deal with it with your family a little bit, but you don't have to overcome that to be seen in God's favor in your eyes, in his eyes. You don't have to overcome that. You don't have to try to save yourself anymore. Because that's what he's trying to do. He's just trying to work and work and work to try to save himself. And he and I, he would call me sometimes. He's like, can we talk? And he would take me out to eat or go get a coffee, or he'd fix a toilet. Then we'd go to Starbucks. And it's so many toilets that were always broken in that church. But maybe that's a way through grace too, right? yeah, that's how he and I got close. Well, one day, I called on him we had this big cross-shaped fountain. It was kind of like an infinity thing, and water kind of poured over the sides of it, and the pump died on it. And the pump was under the ground, and it was just a big mess. So I'm like, you get in that hole and you do that, Mike. And so we replaced the pump, and we're working on the pump, and we're talking like we normally do, and we get it going. We replace the pump, fill it with water, and it's all working again. And Mike makes a joke. He goes, "Well, I guess you can do baptisms here now." And I went, yeah, we can do baptisms here. We can, it's on a nice day, we'll baptize babies. We'd march everyone outside and we'd baptize babies there. Or if someone was older, we would actually dunk them in the fountain. And so we did that. And he looks at me and he goes, "Well, can I be baptized?" And I did what every good pastor does. I went, "You haven't been baptized yet?" Like, you grew up here. You grew up in the South, man. Like, were you not 14 and got dunked at a pool at a church camp somewhere? And he's like, "No." And the next thing I know, I'm in that fountain in my underwear with another man in his underwear, dunking him underneath the water in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. This is going to bug me, and that's the picture I shot afterwards. I have to collect myself. Like, God worked in Mike's life, and he's continuing to work in his life. He still doesn't have all the answers and all of that, but like, he got out and he went over to his truck, and he's like, "I feel strangely clean." He wasn't clean because that fountain was gross. Like, he's just, I feel fine. I feel fine. And the reason why I told the story is that so often we lead with expectations. We lead with, you got to do this, or you got to do that. You got to clean up your life. You got to be, I don't know, whatever expectations we put on people. You got to come to church more. You got to be this. You got to be that. You got to be clean. And we see that at the beginning of Luke, he begins with, "The Lord is gracious." The Lord is gracious. Imagine if that was what we led with as we went out. The Lord is gracious. It might change the world. And I know that's an expectation I'm putting on you now. But leading with grace. So, where's my conclusion? I got so far off of this little thing. We lead with expectations, but God leads with grace. God isn't asking us to look, he's asking us to look at what's right in front of us. Not asking to look like what's in our past. He's asking us to look at a baby, a cross, and a resurrection, and his Spirit. And he's asking us to look and see what it's named. And just like Zechariah and Elizabeth, we see that it's John. It's named "The Lord is Gracious." And we'll end there.